We have participants. Please let me know if you can see me, hear me by putting something in the chat or in the Q&A. That way I know we got audio feed, got video. Thanks for joining us. My name's Idaus Mess. So can someone put in the chat or in the Q&A, let me know if you can see me, if you can hear me. Hola, Gordon. Anyone else? Can you give me a little indication that you can see me or hear me so I know I can proceed with this fantastic webinar? Anyone else? Okay, have a hand up. All right, great. Hope that means you can see me. Ouvir bem, ver muito bom. Tá bom, gente. Cool. And while we let people trickle in for a bit, let me know in the chat where are you coming from to watch this webinar and what language are you learning? Just let me know that in the chat so I know who I'm speaking with. While I set up the presentation. Learning Thai in Florida, coming from Mexico, and learning Espanhol, Portugal, in Porto. I'm in Lisboa, no momento. Canada, Spanish, Espanhol. Cool, great. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We'll start this presentation. I'm going to show you my screen. For those of you who this webinar will be recorded. For those of you watching the recording, then welcome, and there will be chat function as well. So let me share my screen. Okay, you raise your hand or do something to indicate you can see my screen right now. Great, thank you, Gordon. They're all good. All right, so the way it's gonna work, this presentation is 60 minutes long, and you can ask questions while it goes on, and then the last 30 minutes, we'll have a Q&A. If you're watching the recording, my team will be answering Q&A as well. And yeah, so if you have questions, write them down, and then I'll be able to address them later. There also has that hand raising function. If anything's off and you can't really understand or anything, let me know through that. But for now, I'm gonna play this presentation, which you guys can all see, and allow us to begin. So we're gonna talk about how to learn a language faster by learning it backwards, all right? My goal for this web class is to help you if you're a pure beginner and a brand new language. You're gonna learn how to avoid the biggest trap in language learning. You're also gonna learn how to pre-program your brain to think in the language. And you're gonna learn how to achieve conversational fluency as fast as possible, all right? But for those of you who already have experience in the language, you're gonna learn how to understand natives when they speak fast, speak with clarity, confidence, and speed, and how to impress natives with your accent so they treat you like you're one of them, okay? So what I really want you to take away from this course is this. If you want to become fluent as fast as possible, then you must first master the elemental sounds of the language. If you want to become fluent as fast as possible, you must first master the elemental sounds. Now we're gonna talk a bit about what the elemental sounds are and how you master them. But first, we have, as I go through this presentation, many unconventional ideas and approaches and strategies here. And to some people, because it's so different, it might be like, what? But the question you should ask yourself is, does this make sense? Because there's a conventional way of doing things, and I want to prove to you that that does not make sense, even though it's normalized. So as I go through this presentation, I'm going to be asking you, does it make sense? And then I want you to take some time to think about it. And if you have questions, make sure you ask. So first, who am I and why should you worry about anything I have to say? Well, my name is Idaus Ness, and I was born and raised in the United States. And I only spoke English for most of my life up until the age of 17, 18. And then as an adult, since then, I've taught myself how to speak Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, German, and Chinese. So I'm one of these, internet, YouTube, polyglot people. So you can see videos of me online. There's a video here with a program called Easy German, where you can learn German. Or I go around the streets of Berlin and kind of troll people by having them sing songs in German. So you can check that out. But what makes me different from other people is that my accent is often good enough to fool native speakers into thinking I'm one of them. Okay, and I've been able to pull this off in all of the languages I speak, all 6 of the foreign languages I speak, including Chinese. Only thing is, in Chinese, it only works on the phone. If I try to do it in person, for some reason, no one believes me that I say I'm Chinese. But my program, the Mimic Method, this is the most important thing. I've helped thousands of people around the world, like yourself, learn foreign languages faster, understand more, and speak with a better accent through our online training programs. Okay, so I have lots of experience as a teacher as well. So I want to tell you quickly the story of how I came to learn my first foreign language of Spanish. And once again, I grew up in the US, American suburbia. I was really bored most of my life, and I wanted to get out there and explore and see new things. And I was able to convince my teachers and my parents to let me go to Mexico before I graduated high school to spend a few months there to learn Spanish. And at first, when I got there, I was super excited, new food, new culture, and new sights. And it's great, except after a few weeks, I started to kind of slink into a bit of like a depressive loneliness, isolation, because I was not able to speak the language well enough to make myself understood. And when people spoke to me, I wasn't able to understand them. And that was very kind of jarring for me experience, being that kind of isolated loneliness because there's no one else around to speak with. And I was staying with a host family at the time, and I had these host brothers who were similar age. And I remember they had this cousin named Pedro who would come and visit the house every once in a while. And we'd be sitting there playing PlayStation, and Pedro would just be speaking Spanish, super deadpan, normal, like, sí, porque hay mucha persona que está pasando esto, una cosita, y no sé lo que pasa con. And the thing about Pedro is whenever he spoke, he was super calm, but everyone else in the room would be laughing hysterically, just slapping their knees, rolling over the bed, because apparently everything Pedro was saying was super funny. The thing is, I couldn't understand. I was the only person in the room who wasn't in on the joke. And you know the feeling when you walk in to a room and you see like 2 of your good friends laughing really, really hard about something. And then what do you say? You're like, what? What happened? What's the joke? What's going on? What's going on? And then they're like, oh, don't worry, you won't get it, right? And that feeling you have in that moment, no one likes being left out like that. And that's how I felt from the whole country of Mexico, right? I wasn't in on the inside joke. But this thing really got to me because back in the US, in my high school, I had a proud identity as being the funny kid in the class. I was the one who would make the witty comments in the back, make the teacher laugh, make everyone kind of crack up. And it was a big part of my identity that I could make people laugh and be funny. But I was not able to do that with the people in Mexico because I couldn't speak Spanish. So as far as they can tell, I wasn't funny. I was just some stupid gringo who didn't say much hanging in the corner. So the combination of those things really started to get to me. And I was taking classes, studying all the time, reading, writing, learning conjugations, but I wasn't making much progress until one day I just said to myself, you know what? Maybe I'm not cut out to learn Spanish, but at least I can make it sound good. So what I decided to do was from now on, I'm just going to listen to the way Mexicans speak and do my best to mimic their pronunciation as close as I possibly can. So instead of going to a restaurant and ordering food like, ¿puedo tener más tacos, por favor? I would say, ¿puedo tener más tacos, por favor? And I'd exaggerate it, try to speak like a telenovela character and really get into the sound and the melody of the language. I would pay very close attention to the way people's mouths moved and the way their voices went up and the way their voices went down and all these things. And I was doing this for several weeks, and I got to a point where I was able to say Spanish words with a really good Spanish or Mexican accent. And that was all I was going for. I didn't want much else to happen, except all of a sudden, as I was doing this, the language started to open up to me. And all of a sudden, all these words that I could recognize on paper, but I couldn't previously recognize in conversation when Mexicans spoke fast and blurry, they were all coming to me crystal clear. It was like the language had slowed down, and I was finally able to kind of catch on and grab the words and understand it. And then when it was my turn to speak, instead of getting tongue-tied and stuttering the way I used to, now the words were just flowing out of me naturally. I'm like, sometimes I'd even look at myself like, what's going on? Estoy hablando español, ¿qué está pasando? And I was like, whoa. And through this process, after a few months, by the time I left, I was conversationally fluent in my first language, Spanish. And I remember one time Pedro, had come over after being gone for a while. And same scene, same situation as always. He's sitting down, playing PlayStation, making little jokes. Sí, porque unas guacamoles están acá, aguacate, saying whatever he's saying. And everyone's laughing hysterically like always. The only difference this time is that I too was laughing hysterically because for the first time, I could finally understand what Pedro was saying. And it turned out Pedro was really funny. He's a really funny guy. And now I get it. Now I know why everyone laughs while he's around. And, I repeated that process of, learning a foreign language several times to now I speak 7 languages. And I live in Europe where there's, lots of events with, French people and Germans and even Chinese people. And I can kind of go around and speak to everyone in their respective language. And people will see that and they'll say like, wow, it's so cool. I want to speak multiple languages. I want to be a polyglot too. That would be so impressive and cool. And it's true, it is nice to have those abilities and kind of impress people with your skills. But the real reason why I do it is not for that. It's because ever since that first time, having that experience of going to a foreign country or going to a foreign culture and not being able to connect with the people in that culture, but through this process of listening and opening yourself up, you can gradually begin to open up this whole new world of human connection to you, to the point where you go from being a foreigner to something familiar, to being part of the family and being in on the inside joke, having friends, having romantic partners, having business colleagues, whatever it may be. Just getting in with another group of humans is a very special experience. And that's why I decided to make my company on that, to help people like yourself go through that same experience. So one thing I always tell people is you should reframe your thinking from I'm going to learn Spanish or I'm going to learn French or I'm going to learn Portuguese, and say to yourself instead, who am I trying to connect with on a deeper level? But I can't because there's this thing called a language barrier standing in between us. Your goal shouldn't be to learn the language. Your goal should be to connect deeper with those human beings. And then the language is just a tool for you to do that. And that's the underlying kind of philosophy of the Mimic Method, helping you connect through the sounds that you're making with your mouth and hearing with your ears. So that being said, I want to bring this down to ground level now and say, what happened to me in Mexico that I had such a huge shift in my ability to understand and speak the language? And to understand that, you have to understand what the conventional approach to learning a language is. This is what you probably went through, is what everyone goes through, whether you're learning from a school program or from most online programs or from like smartphone applications. It always has the same 3 steps. Step 1, reading and writing. What do you do on your first day of Spanish class? You go there and the teacher is like, okay, everybody, today you're going to learn how to say hi in Spanish. Hola, H-O-L-A, hola, right? And then you're like, wait, that's spelled like holla. And you're like, no, the H is silent in Spanish. Boom, you learn your first rule of writing. And then you have to learn the accents. And if you're learning Chinese or Japanese, you have to learn the strokes and all these kind of things. And the idea is that through reading and writing, you can learn vocabulary on paper. And then when you know vocabulary on paper, you can learn the rules or the theory of grammar. And then if you know the rules of grammar and the vocabulary on paper, then you can practice translating from your first language to the second language. And you translate in a way that's similar to like running trigonometry calculations, right? You're like, okay, third person conjugation, cut the stem, drop this, add 3, divide by pi, multiply by 10, and boom, there's your answer, right? That's the translation approach. And you do that enough times, eventually you get to a point where you can read the language and maybe read a newspaper. You can maybe write an email or, write something very simple or basic, but you do it enough times, you can get to reading and writing pretty easily. What happens then is the idea in the conventional approach is for you to take that ability to translate on paper and bring it to the spoken conversation. So when someone speaks to you, you're supposed to be translating that in your head. And then when you want to speak, translating it back into the language in your head. And if you do that, then theoretically you should be able to understand and speak in the conversation. Then when it comes to the question of how do I sound, What's my accent like? How's my pronunciation? In the traditional conventional approach, they don't really focus on that. They say, oh, well, you can improve your accent after you've already learned the language. It's kind of a nice cherry on top of your sundae to have at the end, but not necessary. And this is what they teach you in the conventional approach to learning a foreign language. Reading and writing first, understanding and speaking second, hearing and pronunciation third, right? But people get stuck at this point from point 1 to point 2, right? This is your stuck point. Who here has difficulty going from reading and writing and understanding and speaking? Or maybe, and you can raise your hand if you kind of indicate on the screen, or maybe you know a bunch of words on paper, but when people speak to you, you're not able to understand. Or when you speak, your tongue gets tied and maybe you know the grammar, but in the moment, it doesn't come out of you naturally. So most people who take the conventional approach to learning a language get stuck from point 1 to point 2, right? That's why the backwards approach starts you off with hearing and pronunciation first. Then you move on to understanding and speaking and reading and writing. So the switch I made when I was learning Spanish was I started to take my focus away from just, conjugating rules and doing all the vocabulary and translation. Instead, paying close attention to the way Spanish sounded and paying close attention to how I move my mouth to make myself sound like a Mexican speaker, right? And when you do it that way, things start to change. All of a sudden, you're opening up your ears and understanding more and opening up your mouth and speaking more fluidly. And to understand why this word approach works, you have to think about the relationship between hearing and understanding and speaking and pronunciation. So here's the relationship. If you can't hear, you can't understand. For example, I can read English perfectly, right? But if I put on these noise canceling headphones and block off all the sound, I won't be able to understand you because I can't hear you, right? And it's the same logic for if I put something in my mouth and I couldn't pronounce the words, then I wouldn't be able to speak. So if you can't hear, you can't understand. If you can't pronounce, you can't speak. Why? Because hearing and pronunciation are the physical foundation of human conversation. If you don't have those taken care of, everything else doesn't work, right? So what happens then? If you can't understand your foreign language or you can't speak your foreign language fluently, what do? Well, it's quite simple. You just have to unblock your ears so you can understand more and unblock your mouth so you can speak better, okay? And once again, this is an unconventional way of learning a language, but ask yourself, does that make sense? Is this what your problem may be if you are sitting here learning new words and learning new vocabulary, but you're not able to actually hear those words in conversation, then maybe you're doing things backwards, right? Now, some of you might be thinking, well, this only works for us kind of polyglot people or people who are extroverted and out there or good with sound and good with ear. Maybe you yourself, with your first foreign language, maybe you're a bit shyer or a bit more introverted. It's difficult for you to kind of come out. Maybe you are a visual learner and you don't consider yourself as having a strong ear for a language. Well, to prove that is not just something for me, but for everyone, I want to show you this video. We did a case study last year of someone who was not this way, complete opposite of me in lots of ways. And he went to learn Italian, right? And he spent several weeks learning it at home. Then he went to Italy, I think for like 10 days to try it out. So what you're going to see right now is what he was able to accomplish after 6 weeks of learning Italian this backwards way. Now let's see what he's been able to do.
Ciao ragazzi, oggi siamo in Palermo, in Sicilia. Questa è la mia amica Silvia e il mio amico Dario. Ciao. E sto imparando l'italiano da circa 40 giorni con il metodo mimico, the Mimic Method. Silvia, allora, che cosa è Couchsurfing e come lo usi?
Couchsurfing è una piattaforma sociale che serve per fare incontrare la gente, soprattutto per i viaggiatori.
All right, cool. So I won't show the whole video, but if you want to check out any more of these videos, just look us up on YouTube at Mimic Method. But I want to show you this video in particular because it brings back to what I said earlier, that learning a language is not about learning the language. It's about connecting with the people. So because Mike did this backwards approach and he was able to get his pronunciation right and get his hearing right and then learn this more natural way that we'll talk about in a bit, he was able to go to Italy, go to Palermo and meet Italians, make friends, make connections, do things that most people are not able to do because they're still stuck behind that language barrier. So once again, who are you trying to connect with and what is holding you back? Now let's bring it back to the presentation. Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty, and I'm going to talk to you guys about the 3 secrets to being able to achieve this level of fluency in your foreign language. Secret number 1, how do you see sound, or how do you learn the sounds of any language in a few weeks, even if you've never considered yourself as having a good ear? So for those of you who are visual learners, the secret's for you. Secret number 2, natural learning. How can you learn vocabulary and grammar without having to rely on strong memory or study habits, right? And then secret number 3, script building. If you've had the experience before of trying to engage people in the foreign language and try to get your conversation practice, but then they speak to you in English, and then you're like, oh, well, I'm feeling kind of awkward now. I can't speak back in the language. And the reason they spoke to you in English because they heard you're a foreigner, they heard you're struggling, they heard your accent, and then they just like, oh, I'll speak to you in English. Well, I have a secret here at the end of this that will teach you how to get around that problem so that you'll have confidence from the very beginning and natives will want to speak to you like you're one of them, okay? So we'll start with the first secret. How do you learn the sounds of any language in a few weeks, even if you've never had a good ear, all right? So I'm going to tell you the story of how I actually came up with the basic idea of Mimic Method. By this point, I had learned Spanish and Chinese, and I decided I wanted to learn Portuguese next, and I went to Brazil. And I was really interested in Brazilian music. And I know that Portuguese is more or less the same as Spanish in terms of vocabulary and grammar. The only difference is the pronunciation. And Portuguese pronunciation is way more complex and difficult. So I said, okay, well, let me just look up Brazilian songs. And then if I learn how to sing these songs with a good accent, that should train my mouth to really kind of get inside of the pronunciation. So I got a couple of my songs I really enjoyed. I looked up the lyrics online, and then I would listen to the songs and follow along with the lyrics. And I was doing this for a little bit, but then I kept running into problems. And it felt like I was trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, as they say, because what the Brazilian artists were singing was not the same as what was on the page of the written lyrics. Sometimes the word would be, this, but in the actual song, it would be something different. It would chop off a whole part of the word or mix words together. And I found that using the written lyrics was actually making things worse. It was confusing me. I didn't know what to do. So I decided okay, well, if I can't rely on the written word because Brazilians don't speak the way that they write, then what can I do? And that's how I got deep into phonetics. So phonetics is the study of speech sound, and phonology is the study of speech sounds in a certain language. So if you go to Wikipedia and type in Portuguese phonology, it'll kind of tell you all the basic things you need to know about the sounds of Portuguese. But if you look at the words on this page, you see you have words like, syllable timed and velarization and rhoticism and all these concepts I had no idea what they meant. And I had to keep opening up new tabs and going deeper and deeper. And the whole process kind of got really difficult. But I got really obsessive, and I was reading books on phonetics and linguistics and going deeper and deeper into these things. And I eventually learned how to visualize the sounds of Portuguese. So what you see here on the left is what in phonetics they call a vowel chart. And what it does is it shows the tongue position you need to be in for each vowel sound. So when you make a vowel sound like I, U, the major thing that makes each sound different is the position of your tongue in the mouth. So this little shape right here is supposed to represent, the side view of your mouth. And I can kind of trace it now. Right? And now you won't be able to do this now because you haven't learned how to see sound. But it doesn't take long to learn this. And when you do learn it, it changes everything. Now when people speak, It's not just this mysterious kind of thing going on behind the closed door of the lips. You're like, I can see what's going on now. I hear it now. I just have to move my tongue down or move it up a little bit. And you fine tune your pronunciation that way. Same thing on the right. You're looking at a side view of the mouth. And when you make a consonant sound like then all you're doing is placing some part of your mouth against some other part of your mouth and putting air out, right? But once again, if you can't see the sound, you don't really know what's going on. So that's why people get so confused about pronunciation. They just don't know what's going on. But when you see these diagrams, you learn to visualize the inside of your mouth. It becomes a superpower. It becomes a way for you to listen to anyone and be like, now I know what they're doing. I just need to move this here, whether it's the r sound in French or the r in Spanish or the German. All these different sounds, when you can visualize it, it makes it much easier to learn it and hear it. So what I was doing then is I went back to these Brazilian songs, and instead of relying on these unreliable written lyrics, instead I listened to it. I slowed down the music and the audio with different software, and I listened to every single syllable that the Brazilian artist said, and then I wrote down the actual sound, the actual movement of the tongue and lips, using something called the International Phonetic Alphabet, which you learn in our programs. And I would do this, and at first it was very difficult, but after a few tries, it eventually became quite easy for me, and because you just get used to it. And when you get to that ability, when you can just hear the actual sounds that are being said, independent of the words that they are supposed to represent, something happens. It feels like I would go back out into the streets of Rio after doing this practice and listen to Brazilians speak. And it was like I pressed the slow motion button on the world. People would speak to you. Well, it used to be like, e aí, cara, tudo bem? They're like, e aí, tudo bom, cara? Right? I can see oh, wow, that's that sound. And that's that sound. And it reminded me of this scene from The Matrix when Neo finally sees the Matrix and they shoot a bunch of bullets at him. And then he stops it and he's able to kind of grab a bullet and look at it and examine it. So once again, if you know a bunch of words on paper, but you can't hear them in conversation because it's too fast, then maybe if you slow things down, that's the secret. And that's what happens when you focus on these things. And once again, it just changes everything. You can speak better, understand way more. And one thing I learned in this process is that Brazilian Portuguese has only 55 elemental sounds. And when I say elemental, what I mean is everything a Brazilian person will say can be broken down into some combination of these 55 sounds. So even though there's, millions of words or expressions or things you can say, they're all just reorganizations of the same consonants and vowel sounds. Same thing right now as I speak to you, there are only 42 different sounds that I'm using. And these are the 42 elemental sounds of American English. There's also 39 elemental sounds of Spanish, 38 elemental sounds of French, the 56 elemental sounds of German. This is step one. If you want to speak a language, think about that. What are you doing? What am I doing right now? All I'm doing is moving my mouth in a way that makes sounds. And then you're hearing those sounds and turning them into meaning in your head. But if you're not able to hear the sounds, then you won't be able to make sense of the meaning. So the very first thing you should do in any Spanish class is not learn what the letters or the character strokes are. You should learn what the basic elemental pieces of conversation are, which is the sounds. So I was pretty surprised that even though you learn the 26 letters of the alphabet or all the different accents, no one taught me what the elemental sounds were before. So that's how I decided to make a course and program based around that. Now the question is, once you know what these elemental sounds are, how do you learn them? How do you master them so that you can hear and pronounce them in conversation? It's actually quite straightforward. First, you need to see the sound. So when I say see it, I mean using your mind's eye, looking at a sound. Let's say, for example, you're learning English. There's a sound sit, which is different from the sound in seat. But if you're learning English, it's very difficult for people. But you can accelerate the learning process if you can see that the E vowel is slightly higher in position than the I vowel. seat, sit. And once again, it doesn't make sense to you unless you've visualized it on a vowel chart. You can see the difference. And then all of a sudden, aha, it makes sense to you. Then once you see that difference, it starts to guide your ear so you can hear the difference, hear the little details and the color and the quality of the sound. You listen to it side by side. At first, the way your brain works is two sounds that are very similar will sound the exact same to you in your mind. But if you see the difference and listen very closely and repeat it over and over again, eventually your mind separates the two sounds into two different categories, and then it becomes automatic. And then finally, when you can hear the differences, you use your ear to guide your tongue, your lips, your pronunciation, the feeling. Every time you speak, there's a feeling in your mouth, a feeling of your muscles contracting in certain very fine motor ways. So when you can feel each sound's pronunciation, then you will have finally mastered the whole sound because you can see it, hear it, and feel it. All right. Now here's what happens after you see, hear, and feel all the elemental sounds in your target language. This is a testimonial from one of our students who lives in New York and grew up in a Dominican neighborhood, but was not able to, or started to grow up, but he lives in a Dominican neighborhood and is not able to understand people because Dominicans speak, their own accent is very fast. So here's what he wrote. There are a lot of Dominicans in my neighborhood, but I can never understand them. They speak so fast and they eat the words. But I've been doing your program for 3 weeks now, and it's like the floodgates have been opened. All of a sudden, I understand way more than I ever did before. All right. So that's what happens to you, even without studying vocabulary or grammar, just by focusing your ear and opening things up, all of a sudden the language is able to flow in. The same words that have been there for years for this guy, the Dominicans, are now finally available to him because he opened up his ears. But some people think, but I don't have a good ear. Maybe, once again, people who consider themselves visual learners may also say that, like, well, auditory is not really my thing. That's why I prefer to use written materials for language learning. But I want to give you a couple stories about that. First, I want you to imagine going to a painting class and you're sitting there and the teacher is like, okay, today we're going to learn how to paint a mountain, right? Put some brown, a little bit of green here, some blue for the sky. And then someone in the back of the class raises his hand and says, oh, teacher, sorry. I'm not a visual learner, so I'm not able to understand any of this. Could you please teach me how to paint through sound? Because I'm an auditory learner, right? You're like, well, that doesn't make any sense because whether you're a visual learner or an auditory learner or kinetic, whatever it may be, at the end of the day, painting is an activity of seeing, visualizing. It's a visual medium. So there's no way around it. If you want to paint, you have to use your eyes. And it's the same thing for language. Language is about sound. So you have to use your ears. So whether or not you think you have a bad ear, there's no way around it. If your goal is to connect with people through conversation by listening to them with your ears, then at some point you need to take time to strengthen and build the power of your ears. But don't worry if you feel like you're not good enough, because I used to think that some people were good at certain things and not at the other, and then you'll never learn. And one thing that I never was able to do well was draw. My brother could draw, my mother could draw. Whenever I tried drawing, I just made a smiley face and I couldn't even close the circle properly, and it was all terrible. And when I was in middle school, this cartoon was super popular among me and my friends, and I had a bunch of friends who could draw pictures of these characters, Dragon Ball Z. And I was always jealous because they could make these super cool pictures of people like shooting fireballs out of their hand and like, oh, I want to do that. But whenever I tried, I would just have these really crappy smiley faces with spiky hair and, didn't really do anyone anything. So I almost gave up. And then one day I said, you know what? I'm just going to really try. Just really put in my best effort instead of just kind of half trying it. And let us take time, be patient, and see what I can do. And I took that character in the back right there, this guy Piccolo. He's got the purple pants on and the green skin. And I took a picture of him. He's like sitting there like, ah. And I sat there and very slowly and very carefully I looked, I paid attention, and then I tried to kind of do the same angles, the same line thickness, same shapes. And at first it was bad. I'd erase it, try it again. But I was super patient and super slow. And probably took me a week in a total of 10 hours looking at this piece of paper. But by the end of it, I was able to create a perfect representation of Piccolo. It was like best, I colored it, everything, and it was really good. I brought it into class. Everyone was like, "Whoa, Piccolo!" I'm like, "Yeah," and I was the king of school for a whole lunch period, and I was really proud of myself. And I learned a really important lesson from that, because I used to think I just didn't have the ability, like I didn't have the genes or the natural capacity to ever do anything through drawing. But I was wrong. I'll tell you another story to make it into the language learning context. In university, I learned Chinese. In the first semester of Chinese, our teacher, who was this Taiwanese lady, she had asked us for homework to memorize an entire script, like a whole paragraph of Chinese, like a dialogue, right? So we all went back to the library and we sat there and we're like reading this Chinese dialogue and trying to memorize it, like a 张天明要吃饭, 他和朋友, and we're just doing this like thing, but you look at it and then like close it and try like, look at it again, try, and we were all up until like 2:00 in the morning at the library trying to memorize this thing, but no one was able to do it. So we come back to class the next day, teacher's like, all right, you try it. And then, the first guy's like, Zhang Tianming, I can't do it. All right, you do it. Zhang, and no one was able to do it. And she's like, yeah. She's the old Chinese lady. And she's like, yeah, okay, close your books. And we all kind of close our books. Like, close your eyes. Talking about it. Close your eyes. We like, close our eyes, and then she starts to say each phrase, and we listen, and then we mimic after her. We're like, 张天明要吃饭. 张天明要. And the first few times she did it, no one's able to get the line because we don't have a visual aid. But she said, keep your eyes closed, keep repeating, keep listening and repeating. And after a couple of tries, eventually everyone in the room was able to say the whole phrase. And then she goes on to the next line. Same thing. Everyone's not good at first, but then after like 10 tries, we all have it. And she keeps repeating this process over and over again. And after about 20 minutes, we were finally able to, all of us, say the whole phrase, the whole paragraph by memory perfectly, without having to look at anything, right? So that taught me something, because there's very different abilities. Some people were good at Chinese, some people weren't that good at it, but everyone was able to do it. And that taught me this, combined with the Dragon Ball Z question, anyone can learn to use their ears. You just need patience and proper training. And that's it. Patience and proper training. Some people are patient and they work really, really hard on something, but if they're doing the wrong thing, the wrong practice, then you won't learn it. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Okay. So if you are someone who considers yourself as not having good ears and you say like, oh, I just can't do that. First, remember that there's no way around it. You're in the game of ears, so you have to do something. Second, consider that maybe you weren't doing the right type of training and you weren't doing it long enough to see results. And I can pretty much guarantee you, because I've been doing this for years and seen thousands of people in their transformation, even older people who have lost their ability to hear, through the right type of training of patience, you can take your current ability of hearing in any language from here to way up there. You just have to do the right thing and do it long enough. Okay. So once again, does that make sense? There's people who are usually very resistant to the idea of closing their eyes to learn a language. But once again, language is about sound. It's a foundational piece. So if you're stuck in the language or you're stuck in conversation, consider the fact that it's because you haven't spent enough time on the sound. But it's okay, because there are ways you can do it and have it be fun. Okay? So to restate that, you can learn the elemental sounds of any language in just a few weeks of proper training, even if you've never had a good ear. Okay? Now, second secret, how can you learn vocabulary and grammar without having to rely on strong memory or study habits? Okay? So when people find out that I speak 7 languages, they'll often kind of assume that like, oh, wow, you must have a really good memory, like memorize all those words and crazy stuff. And it's like, not really. I have a terrible memory. ask me what I did yesterday. It'll take me like 15 minutes to remember like one thing, right? I don't think about the past that much. I'm not good at memory stuff. Also, people would say like, oh, well, you must be a really good like grammar studier. Like you sit down and you just like, 2 hours a day study. I'm like, no, I hate studying. I don't do that either. Say, okay, well, how did you learn the language? Isn't learning a language about studying and memorizing? No, not at all. Here's how you learn a language. It's quite simple, okay? What is a language? It's just a way of calling things with your mouth, making sounds to refer to the world. So imagine you go to a foreign country and you have an apple and you say, okay, I want to be able to communicate something about apples to people in this culture. So what do? You grab the apple, you find someone, you say, hey, what do you call this thing? Or what sounds do you make with your mouth whenever you want to refer to this thing or the apple, right? And then the guy says like, oh yeah, we call that kerfluffle. And then you listen and then you mimic kerfluffle, right? At the moment you mimic, something happens in your brain. You make an association, a link between three things: the sound, kerfluffle, the thing, or an apple, and the feeling, kerfluffle, back of your tongue, in the throat, kerfluffle, right? Sound, thing, feeling, make an association. But the line's dotted here because it's a weak association. If you only make the link once, it's going to be weak. But that means that when you come back around and the guy's like, huh? You remember what I taught you? What's this thing called? And you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's I don't remember, right? And you don't remember the first time because that's not how the brain works. But the next time, if you keep repeating this process of listening and mimicking, kerfluffle, then the next time you're in a situation where an apple comes up and the person's like, what's this? Then you're like, oh, this time I know it. It's a kerfluffle. Yeah, kerfluffle. He's like, oh, good job. When you recall that first time, something else happens in your brain. You strengthen that connection. The lines are thicker now. Sound, feeling, thing. That association becomes its own concept in the mind, where it's much stronger, so that next time the guy comes to, hey, what do you call this? You're like, kerfluffle. You don't have to think about it. It's automatic. You've automatically associated the thing, feeling, and the object. Now, notice how in this whole process, you would never use your eyes. Sure, maybe you see the apple, but the thing of the apple is just not the way it looks. It's also the way it feels. It's what it means to you, the flavor, the taste, the smell, the Garden of Eden, all these different associations. Doesn't matter. The thing is that you don't need your eyes to learn it. All you need is your ear and your mouth, and your brain, right? So the concept, the idea, the thing, the object is now making an association in your mind. And when you first do it, it's weak. But if you repeat it in real life context where there's emotion to engage your brain, then you do that over and over again, it becomes automatic. The word automatic for me comes out automatically because I've made the association between the idea of automatic, the sound of automatic, and the feeling of that feeling is all connected and associated super tightly in my head after using that word a million times in my life. Okay. Now it's the same thing for grammar. That was just talking about single word vocabulary, but it's the same for grammar. There's a difference between grammar knowledge and grammar intuition. So if I said to you, I can has cheeseburger, if you're an English speaker, then you will immediately know that that is bad grammar. But why? Is it because you had a flashback to 7th grade English class and you're like, oh yeah, the teacher taught me on the whiteboard that in English, when you have a second verb, it has to, conjugate in the infinitive form, and has is actually the conjugation of the third person singular form. And therefore, when the verbs don't agree and number, no, you didn't do any of that stuff, right? What you did was you thought, that sounds wrong, right? Immediately, you just knew it sounded wrong. And when you immediately know something, that's your intuition. Your intuition is the part of your brain that just operates automatically to navigate the world. It's a part of your brain that keeps you on a bicycle without falling, keeps you walking down the street without falling. Intuition is just the automatic knowledge, automatic knowing of the brain. And your goal isn't to memorize the, grammar textbook of your foreign language. Who cares if you know what a preposition is or what the third person conjugation of tener is? What you need to know is intuition. You need to be able to hear when what you're saying is not right. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right. And remember, if I said to you, Icahn has cheeseburger, you know it's wrong because it sounds wrong. And once again, the sound has to be able to be received by your ear through that same process we just talked about of making the connection. But it only works if you can listen and you can mimic. Okay? So once again, this is a very unconventional way of learning, except it's the most natural way of learning, because think about how you learned as a baby, right? I didn't invent this approach. You did when you're a child and you first listen to the sounds, let them enter your ear, make a differences. Ba, ba, ga, ga, goo, goo, la. You're training your mouth to make those sounds. You start to mimic your first words like papa, doggy, blue, right? And then you string those words together into like sentences, and then you have basic structures. So then you can kind of figure out the grammar without even thinking about it. It just kind of sounds right to you. And by the time you're in first grade or kindergarten, you're already conversationally fluent because of this process of listening and mimicking. And you don't even know how to read or write anything, okay? So to restate that secret, if you learn to mimic, you can learn vocabulary and grammar by ear without having to rely on strong memory or study habits, the natural approach to learning, right? Now, final thing we'll talk about here is script building. How can you speak with confidence from the beginning so that natives will want to speak to you like you're one of them? All right, I'm gonna show you a video one more time of our friend Mike here. Now, we already watched Mike after 6 weeks. This is what Mike was able to do after just 4 weeks of learning Italian.
Vengo da New York, starò qui in Portogallo fino a mese. Quest'estate ho vissuto in alcune città europee e ora sto trascorrendo le mie ultime 2 settimane in Italia e sto imparando l'italiano da circa un mese. Voglio impararlo perché mi piacerebbe conoscere la vostra cultura e anche perché I miei familiari sono italiani.
All right, so notice how he was able to speak. This is perfect Italian grammar, really good, perfect Italian pronunciation. So super impressive after just 4 weeks of learning language. What's going on here? How is he able to do that? Well, this is what we mean by script training. So think about the situations you have where you go to a dinner party or a social networking event and someone comes up and talks to you and you say, oh, hi, my name's Idausa. I do blah, blah, blah. Right? You say, what do you do? Where are you from? Why are you learning the language? Why are you visiting this country? Think about these conversations you have. And if you're doing it in a foreign language, I'm willing to bet that each time you have it, you kind of stumble through it. It's not perfect grammar. You're not as happy about it as you would like. Yet you do the same thing over and over again and you have the same conversation. So the fastest way to get to that part of the conversation where you're confident in speaking is to master scripts. So what you do is you think about the things you want to say in a basic conversation. They're going to come up every time. Like, who are you? What do you do? Why are you doing it? You write it out in English. You get someone who's a native Italian speaker or a native speaker of your language to translate it. Then you have that person record him or herself, and then you learn it and mimic it by ear. And the whole process takes a couple of days, takes a bit of focus and effort. But when you do it, it pays huge rewards because now when you go into a conversation with someone, you can make a very strong first impression. They talk to you, they don't know your level of ability, but now you can speak the first few minutes with perfect grammar, perfect pronunciation. And they'll say like, oh, wow, you must speak the language. So we talked before, if you've had experience of trying to engage people in the language, but they just respond back to you in English and they don't really get that practice you need to get better, this is how you solve that problem. You make a strong first impression and then they'll always speak to you in the language. So for example, when I learned German 2 years ago, 3 years ago, first I learned all the 56 elemental sounds of German, so my pronunciation was spot on. Then I went to Germany and I took a bit of time to learn a quick 4-sentence script about, where I'm from, why I'm in Germany and why I'm learning German. And we were in Frankfurt and sitting at a kind of beer house, and this guy was sitting next to us, and he's like, woher kommst du? Warum bist du hier in Deutschland? And I was like, ich komme aus Amerika und ich bin hier nur für die Wochenende mit meinen Freunden. And they're like, whoa, dein Deutsch ist sehr gut. Your German's so good. And like, he started speaking to me, I was German. And I didn't know what he was saying because I just started learning German a couple of weeks ago. And, but because I had such a strong first impression, his brain just registers me as a native German speaker. So he speaks to me and gives me the conversation practice that I need. And I say to him like, well, sorry, I'm still learning. And he's like, oh, okay. And we kind of switch to English. And he's like, oh, well, you speak very good. And then he kind of goes, talks around, and like see him again 15 minutes later, and jumps right back into German with me. Why? Because soon as the brain puts someone in a certain category, it's really hard to get them out of there. And we know this, right? First impressions really do matter. So if you're going around making poor first impressions about your language ability, then it's going to be really hard to switch those people back in. If you had experience, if you know someone in English and they speak the language that you're trying to learn, so you try to speak with them and then it just feels awkward to everybody and they don't want to do it. That's why, because people don't like to just switch complete emotional contact with people. But if you start off on the right foot, you won't have that problem. And once again, Mike was able to do that in just 4 weeks because it's just memorizing. That's the only memorizing you do. You don't need to know the grammar. You just have to kind of memorize it like a song, or the same way an actor memorizes lines to a play, or a comedian memorizes his routines for a show. It's just a little bit of focused effort and the brain takes care of the rest, right? So if you train your accent, you can speak with confidence from the start. Then native speakers will want to speak to you like you're one of them, all right? It's a very powerful trick here if you do it. But once again, it's all based on the ability to get the sounds right, all right? So the question I'm gonna ask you now to yourself to think about is, if you did everything we talked about and you spent a few short weeks to train the elemental sounds of your target language, and you listened to and mimicked native speakers to pick up new words, expressions, and grammar patterns, and you memorize scripts so you can boost your speaking confidence and impress native speakers into wanting to speak with you more. And that gives you the foundation of the sounds, the feedback loop for you to listen and mimic and naturally acquire new language to enter and flow out of you. And then to speed up the process of confidence and ability, you learn these scripts that apply to the contexts that are useful to you. Do this process and you keep having conversations, you keep mimicking. The question you have to ask is, do you think you will eventually reach conversational fluency? And the answer is yes, because if you're stuck, it's because you're stuck in a corner. Get yourself free, still a lot of work to do, but now you're on the right path. It's just a question of walking forward, all right? So I want to tell you now about our language program, the Elemental Sounds Masterclass, and then I'm going to take questions after this. There's a special offer available to you for watching this webinar. It expires soon. So I'm going to tell you about it, tell you how to get it, and then we'll go from there. So our Elemental Sounds Masterclasses go through the hearing and pronunciation of each elemental sound in your language. We do an in-depth analysis of each sound. So most people will come in there with a few sounds that are just really give them trouble, you know, like the R sound in Spanish and French, or how to make the CH sound in German, and a bunch of other sounds you may not realize you're mispronouncing, but when you see it, you're like, oh, wow, that's why I sound so weird. So you figure that out through our videos. Lots of video content for you to work through. Also lots of native speaker audio content for you to practice with. We use high frequency words, the things you're actually going to hear in conversation. We also give you homework assignments and drills for training your mouth and building up the muscles to do it. And it's a lifetime access thing. So when you purchase any of our programs, you have it as your reference. It's an online training program that you can reference at any moment in time for the rest of your life. So the structure is pretty straightforward. First, you learn the vowels, and this gives you a feeling of your tongue position and how to use and be aware of your mouth when you're making vowel sounds for the easy ones, the ones that you already have in English and other languages. Then once you have that ability, you can start to fine tune your pronunciation for the more difficult vowel sounds. And it's the same thing for consonants. You do easy consonants to learn where your tongue's placed in the mouth, and then the more difficult ones after that. This class is made for people who are pure beginners and they want to start off on the right foot, and you don't want to waste time and energy and frustration, going the conventional route and getting stuck like everyone else. But for those of you who are already stuck and you've been learning for a bit, but you're frustrated as an intermediate learner and you want to break through the blocks in your conversational ability, you can't understand people when they speak fast, and you can't express yourself when it's your turn to speak, get tongue-tied. This course will help you break through those things so you can speak with better accents, speak more fluently and confidently, and understand way more of the words that are coming at you. And then for those of you who already have a decent conversational ability, but you're self-conscious about your accent, it's difficult to be in a situation where everyone's speaking one way, like, ja, alles gut, ja, ich glaube, das ist ja so schön. And you're like, yeah, ich würde gerne. And then you have your accent and everyone's like, right? And you want to blend in. Research shows that people like you more if you sound like them. So fixing your accent is not just a cherry on top. It's not just a fun thing to do. It really makes a difference in your social interactions. Now, there's a couple of bonuses we're going to include in this offer if you sign up before the thing expires. The first are these IPA flash decks. IPA stands for the International Phonetic Alphabet. And we use this because when you use the writing system of a language, it can confuse you, right? This language, the letter T means ch, whereas for us, it means t, and for that language, it means tss. And it's all different sounds for the same letter if you're using different writing systems. IPA is the internationalized, standardized version that you learn. And then we make these flash decks so you can learn them faster. When you know them, it becomes a superpower. It allows you to learn things faster, hear things more clearly. And that's usually a separate product, but we're including it as part of this offer if you sign up in time. Now, this is not the actual price. I'm showing you the retail value of these bonuses. And then in a couple of minutes, I'm going to reveal to you what the discount offer price is. So bear with me. The Elemental Sounds Masterclass, if you go on our website, costs $197, and IPA flash decks are $47 on their own, which brings total value to $244, but that's before discount. We're also going to give you these elemental soundtracks where we take the most common words, organize them by sound, and set them to a beat. And what this does is it trains your brain to learn these sounds faster, kind of ingrain the differences and stuff like that in your head, all while doing it in a fun musical context and environment. So people enjoy that. That would raise the retail value before discount to this, $291. Also, we made a masterclass last year on intonation. People requesting like, oh, well, how do I learn beyond the elemental sounds, the way the voice goes up and down when you speak, right? So you can learn intonation the same way. It's just a question of learning the patterns, listening close, learning how to control your mouth and your voice box to kind of go up and down. So I made a separate masterclass on that, which is usually a $97 offer thrown into this package as well, bringing the total shopping cart to $388 before discount. And finally, there's this thing we're promoting called the Hyperphonic Power Pack. And essentially, you can get all 10 of our languages. We have it in Spanish, French, German, Russian, Portuguese, English, Chinese, Italian, Japanese. And we also have it for European Portuguese, 2 different courses, Brazilian and European Portuguese. And that would be a total of like $3,000 if you bought all that separately, because it's also 10 times the IPA decks, 10 times elemental soundtracks, all of these things. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, I only want to learn one language. Why would I care about an offer to get 10? It seems like a lot, right? I'll explain to you why we put this offer together. We're getting lots of emails like this. Hey, Dalsa, last year I took your French course and it really helped me with my nasal vowels, but I still struggle to get them perfect. But I just signed up for your Portuguese program and now I think I finally get it. I just had to see it from a different angle. So what happens here is, who knew your Portuguese course was going to help me with my French? So what happens here is I don't recommend people learn multiple languages at once because your brain kind of gets confused, but it is actually a good thing to learn the pronunciation and sounds of multiple languages, because even though each language and culture is different, we all have the same mouth. We all have the same anatomy and physiology here. So when you learn pronunciation in one language, it carries over to your ability to hear and pronounce things in another, because it allows you to master the instrument of your mouth. Think about a violin player who can play, music in classical, but can also play in rock and roll and bluegrass and, other things. Because she's able to play in these different contexts, she's mastered the instrument more. So when a new genre or a new song comes her way, she can learn it faster than the next person, right? So I discovered this for myself when I learned all these different languages. Each language I learned, I was able to learn the pronunciation way faster because I already knew most of the sounds. And I started to see the whole matrix once again, not just of one language, but of all the elemental sounds and all 10 of these languages we're talking about. And you can learn that ability yourself very quickly in just almost a month, 1 to 2 months of just kind of seeing these different things. You focus on your main language, and then you see a specific sound. You look for that sound in the other courses, the other languages, and you get a kind of comparative context, and you say, now I understand how to make this sound. And it really is a superpower when you can hear the elemental sounds of multiple languages. And then when you go to any new language, you're 10 times faster and able to take in and learn the sounds. So all of this is why we put this hyperphonic package together. Once again, if we took all these things at their individual listed value, it's about $3,000 worth of language products. But for watching this webinar and getting to the end of it, you can get this whole hyperphonic power pack for $197. So that's the price of just one course. If you go to our site normally, now you can get this deal, but it expires tomorrow, right? And if you just want one language, it's $97, but for all 10, it's $197. And for those of you who are watching the recording, you should see a button click up right now for you to take this offer. For those of you watching right now, check out mimicmethod.com ZY58 for the package. Put that in right here. ZY58 is the code at the end. Mimicmethod.com. This is how you get to this page. You see the webinar offer will expire in a day and 12 hours. And you can get all 10 courses for $197. Let's click this button here. And then just put in all your billing information as so, your email, all that kind of stuff. And then we take a credit card, Visa, Amex, Max, all the credit cards. You can also play with PayPal if you prefer, and complete your purchase. And that'll give you instant access to the courses. And then you can start with the hyperphonic lecture series where I go through each elemental sound in all the languages and give you a survey of the entire mouth. So you can just see how the mouth works in all the different contexts. Super useful, super powerful stuff. And we have a 100% money back guarantee on all of our courses, 60 days. So no risk, just give the course a try. And if you don't like it, we'll refund you the entire purchase. Pretty straightforward. So once again, $197 for all 10 courses, or just $97 for one. I'm going to leave this up and then take questions now for the rest of the time. Yeah, someone mentioned chunking before. That's exactly it. So chunking is the ability to listen to, if you have a lot of data, lots of sounds coming at you at once, chunking is the ability to go in there and break it down into the relevant pieces. So that's what I did when I was learning Brazilian Portuguese. I was putting it into the different chunks and the syllables. But in able to do that, I have to know what the elemental sounds are. So we usually think of language as a bunch of words coming at us, but that's not how it works. There's no spaces between words when you speak. The words kind of blend together. What you're really hearing is chunks of sound coming at you. And then when you break up those chunks, you have elemental sounds. So most people are not understanding when people speak because they're not listening for the right chunks. And the reason why they can't hear the right chunks is because they can't hear the elemental sounds those chunks are made out of. So this course teaches you what those elemental sounds are so that the chunking process becomes more natural. And Gordon gave an example of what do you want, right? So if you're learning by eye, the conventional approach, you would learn, what do you want, right? So it's like, what do you want? There's very different sounds from what do you want, right? I don't even make a t sound when I say, what do you want? All right. But if you take our English course, for example, and you learn the 42 elemental sounds of English, you can break that down into its actual chunks and sounds. So it's what do you want? Right? So all of that kind of comes together. All right, I think there's another chat thing here in the Q&A. Brazilian Portuguese is different from Portuguese. Yes, so that's why we have a separate course for Marlon. We have the 55 elemental sounds of European Portuguese. So you can get that course separate or just get the whole 10 language pack, and it's different sounds. And I break down what the, Portuguese in Brazil will be like. Eu posso falar mais assim, mais com sotaque aqui, sabe? Pode pronunciar coisas assim, mas em Portugal falamos mais assim, é mais fechado. As sonidos, sílabas são diferentes, right? So you learn the difference between those two in the courses. And it's actually good if you get the hyperphonic pack, you can get both and kind of compare the two. Most people learning Portuguese are using Brazilian materials, which are not going to help you. The number one thing holding people back in Portugal from learning Portuguese is the pronunciation, as I'm sure you're aware. So that's why this elemental sounds course will be super useful for you. Is there a difference in learning Castilian Spanish and Latin American Spanish? How does your course address this in the learning? Good question. So Marlon asked about Portuguese. Brazilian Portuguese is different enough from European Portuguese that you need your own course. European Spanish and Latin American Spanish are similar enough that there's no need for a different course. So the 39 elemental sounds of Spanish is our course. It includes the sounds from Spain and all of Latin America. And what makes each accent different is just certain words you'll use different sounds. From Brazil to Portugal, there's just new sounds entirely, and it's very different. So the way we dress in the course is we just give you the sounds and give you a variety of kind of context to play with. Then it's up to you, whatever part of the world you're in or whatever group of people with whom you wish to connect on a deeper level. Once you have the pieces, you listen to those people and you start to mimic. And then you can start to take on their accent. And then that's the fastest way to learn, is to speak the way those people speak. So we're accent agnostic here at the MIM Method. We're not saying that like, oh, this accent's better to learn than this one. No, the best accent to learn is the accent of the people you want to communicate with, right? So the best we can give you is the tools to do that, give you all the elemental sounds you need. And whether you're learning in Madrid or in Mexico City, they're using the same 39 elemental sounds more or less, and they're all in this course. So I hope that answers your question, Kevin. Were there any other questions you wanted me to address? Once again, you can get this discount code ZY58 or click the button if it's watching the recording, and it'll take you to this page. If you go to mimicmethod.com, normally 197 will get you one course and no bonuses. This one gets you all 10 courses and bonuses at 95% discount. We can get any one course for 97. So once again, this offer expires in 1.5 days, about 36 hours. So make sure you take advantage as soon as possible. And if there's no more questions, then I will sign off in a moment. Cool. Well, if no questions, then thank you guys for watching. Thank you for asking the questions. For those of you watching the recording, you can email us at support@mimicmethod.com. mimicmethod.com. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you everyone else for watching. And I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope you try our course. Remember, it's 100% money back guarantee. So there's no risk in trying. Just give it. And then if you don't like it, just email us. But it is very powerful, very useful stuff. You won't find this level of detail and understanding of pronunciation and hearing anywhere else out there. And remember, your goal is to have a conversation, then you need to learn these sounds. There's no way around it. It has to happen. Otherwise, you're going to struggle and be frustrated for a very, very long time. And most likely, as most people do, give up on the whole project altogether. Don't let it come to that. Take the right first step in learning any language and learn the actual elemental sounds. All right. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll talk to you next time.